Good evening. This is a bit unusual setting for the Sunday show. We have a special day. This is the election day in Ukraine, and we at Hromadske International to discuss what the election campaign means for Ukraine, what to expect next. And my name is Natalia Humenyuk, and we have this kind of a Facebook Live with the great panel. We have Anna Nemtsova, who is the correspondent of the Daily Beast, the American journalist, Sebastien Gobert, who is the long-time Ukraine watcher and the French correspondent here, the co-founder of the journalist collective Daleko Blisko, and Oleksandr Sushko, an expert and the CEO of the Renaissance Foundation here, knowing a lot about the civil society and what's going on here. So I should probably remind that the polls are closing at 8 p.m. We have the exit polls in Ukraine, and there is little reason not to trust them. We are not eligible to really, campaign till 8 and discuss particularly in details the candidates, but I think a lot of people already know what's going on and expecting what's next. So I would like probably for a foreign audience just to say, how you see the campaign. And I probably would ask Anna first, because you're living in Kiev, you're also based here, you a bit have come here, you've been at these debates at the stadium, so what is your impression, like a fresh impression?
Well, I started covering this campaign months ago, but 3 months, right? It's been, or 2.5. But this week was interesting because I traveled to Umань and spoke with the Jewish community who celebrate one of the candidates. May I say who? Or I'm not supposed to. But it was interesting to hear why and what the expectations are. And why people... We
can speak about the expectation of the people. Yeah. Probably that's the most interesting things to understand why we have what we have. So
basically, the head of the community we spoke with, the Jewish community in Umань, said that people expect the attacks, the number of the attacks, or cases of anti-Semitism to grow, to be reduced in the coming 5 years, because they monitored something like 100 cases of anti-Semitism or even more just in the past year. So they like the idea that...
Which is less than in France.
Yeah, I'm sure it's less than in Russia, and in many places in Europe today. But the fact that Zelensky, one of the candidates, actually it means that he has Jewish roots, was interesting for the community, and they welcome that. They say there are many Jewish politicians, but they do not admit their origins, and he openly says that is unique, and not only for the post-Soviet space, but also for Eastern Europe these days, right? And the fact that Ukraine was always blamed for being anti-Semitic or far-right.
Though I probably would probably jump into that, in particularly that saying that, for instance, in the first round, the Open Nationalist had got 1.6%, which is probably the lowest we can ever have in recent polls all over the...
And traveling from the regions to Kiev, speaking with people on the bus, I realized how much people actually welcome the election process and how much they celebrate the idea of democracy, which is a unique thing too. NDI tell me that up to 80% of people say that they would like to have democracy and democratic reforms in Ukraine, and there are no divisions about that. It's a quite united opinion, right? People want to have democratic processes in Ukraine, which is great. So today we are observing a historical day, and let's see what it brings.
Sebastien, what are your concerns? How did you see this campaign? Because I think that the Ukrainians were... there are a lot of those who are saying we don't have the choice. There are, at least in our bubble, I should say, there are a lot of people like that. And I probably would talk a lot about the bubbles during this election.
Yeah, I think the journalists are also, and Ukrainians as well, are kind of frustrated with the way that the campaign went, and no exchange of ideas. This debate at the stadium on Friday, it was more like a fight of gladiators or like a chicken fight or something than more like a proper exchange of ideas. We don't really know what Volodymyr Zelensky has been offering and what he thinks that the country, where he thinks that the country should be in 5 years, and so on and so on. So like when it comes to the assessment of the campaign, it's very true that this is something we have never seen before. in Ukraine, but also in many different countries. It has been quite fresh in some sense, like also if we compare it to the post-Soviet neighbors. But it has brought a lot of uncertainties and a lot of questions that still didn't find any kind of answers. And also it has brought a lot of frustration and a lot of resentment from quite many people. Like the voters of Poroshenko now really feel that the election and the country is going to be stolen from them, and that after that, everything is going to collapse.
That's a bit of something we hear during a lot of elections. Oleksandr, you were following elections in this country for many years. So what is special in this campaign, and how you would also explain to our foreign audience? Because, the same things could be described very much differently. An experienced newcomer, like anti-establishment, or, like fight with the old system.
Yes, and this is something unusual. Certainly there is not a standard type of election campaign. Certainly there is a big debate now in Ukraine to what extent it is the protest dominating again the entire political class, or this is a protest against a certain part of this political class. But from my opinion, this is certainly the signal sent quite clearly to establishment that the way they used to rule is no longer appropriate for the most of people. And this is probably the only big element which unites all this big portion of voters who vote for Zelensky. Yes, so because it is really hard, it's difficult to find any uniformed ideological background behind all these things, but certainly the only one is that something is going wrong.
You mentioned the debate. I think there were a lot of foreign journalists and international attentions. You rarely had the two candidates being on the stadium. Some people really criticized that it was not really the proper debates, not a deep, in-depth debates, and definitely there is no question that we would like to have the better dialogue and discussion. At the same time, when we follow a lot of elections for the last couple of years especially, they also much as a show business and sport. So what are your impression? Because I've heard a lot of countries, especially if you look globally, people say would people be laughing at the Ukrainians at this stage? How it's seen?
I've been covering elections around post-Soviet countries since '99. So in Ukraine I've been working for 2 decades, and I have never seen anything like these debates on Olympic Stadium in the last 2 decades. That is an amazing example for the region. All elections from this moment, every time we cover elections, we would expect something like that. We would expect people to actually face each other in front of the crowd. I'm sure there are many reasons to criticize certain lines, certain dramatic scenes, certain buses bring certain people, but the fact that the debates took place in Kiev, and thanks to the security, it was quite peaceful, right? Although there were many concerns previously. That is a positive. That is a very positive moment. And if we see the waves of blames, of mutual, of this dirty accusations and aggressive accusations. To me, that night of debate was like the ninth wave, the biggest tsunami wave. And after that, all the other splashes and accusations were not as significant as that night. On that night, they even had a moment of reconciliation, the candidates, I think, when they were on their knees.
You're quite skeptical. How do you see that?
I think certainly the country is divided, and we observe this as I would say features of this deep divide. But it is really unusual divide, because usually we have seen some divide between the regions, but it is not the case of today. This is not even ideological divide. Because, for example, when it comes to the even very, I would say, patriotic voters, those who were perceived as a major constituency of the President Poroshenko, even this constituency is divided. Those who identify themselves as strong patriots. And part of them go to Zelensky as well. So this is no longer clear divide which we used to see. So that is why the question mark how to deal with divide and what is the future consequence of this divide, how it will be translated into some new political reality which probably will appear only after parliamentary election this autumn.
Which I also should remind that yes, a lot would be followed by the parliament election in October. So I think the campaign, the parliamentary campaign, starts as soon as tomorrow. So there would be like you would see how some parties would flip-flop. That's definitely would happen. How the like things would look. Who is the winner? Still about the questions we are asking, in particularly to the candidates and most probably to Zelensky. He's heavily criticized by the experts of not being clear because of the lot of things. At the same time, if you look at this campaign, what he has, and especially accused of not very much clear about NATO, not very much clear about this, not that much red lines. At the same time, that was a winning campaign in the way that if you put the things like poverty, corruption, that's something which unites the people, and you see the results, at least according to the polls which have been published earlier. So what do you see the main questions still to be asked to Mr. Zelensky, like tonight, a bit later tonight?
We'll see what happens
from Ukraine and from outside of Ukraine.
Tonight, but I think that the major question which certainly will appear is what next. What happens after? Because we don't know. Certainly, we have heard all these beautiful slogans like "We have done," so this is something which was targeted exactly just to get votes. It was not a message of any kind of the vision of future, and so this vision is quite ambiguous. So nobody really knows what is the plan, and certainly we can even be almost sure that there was no plan, and there is no plan, and so the biggest question is what's the next, and who will be and who is to build this plan, and who is to be around, and who is to be an ally, and who is to be on the other side. So this is a lot of things. Certainly there will be no immediate response, but at least there will be a new time after the vote to clarify all these issues which were neglected because of the logic of campaign. So Zelensky's aim was to unite as wide as possible. That is why there was no ideological markers really visible on his side. But then there is an issue to identify I would say the logic of the next steps. For example, that goes about the relations with the current parliament and the government. I think that the cabinet of ministers. So this is a key element of any future strategy. So we have a cabinet of ministers. We have a parliament which is still legitimate till October, and there is some transitional period of time which is quite visibly provides a lot of challenges, because we don't know what's going on in these wide relationships.
Yeah, but actually, because we don't know exactly what is going on and what the program of Zelensky may offer to the country, actually, I would not really agree with you, Oleksandr, on this idea of a new divide, because we see in some polls, like there was this poll by the Razumkov Center, that something like 41% of Zelensky's voters, they want intervention of the state in the economy. 47, they want a market economy. Like there was something like 50% who want closer to Europe and like 30% who want closer to Russia, and so on, so on. We see that he has aggregated a lot of different voters who basically vote for him because they don't want to vote for Poroshenko. This is one of the main reasons of his success, but also because they don't really understand what he stands for. And this is something that he has to clarify.
I would probably clarify on that as well, because for a while, especially during the last couple of weeks, I'm talking to so many foreign journalists, Ukrainian journalists, experts, and there is this kind of saying, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know. But you still can get into the program, you know, like the vision is there. The vision, like how good they should be, you know, unified, you know, modern, all this kind of, all the good things, which somebody could say it's a populism. At the same time, the question is not exactly, because in a lot of points, you know what he wants. The question is like, is he capable? And how you get there.
But look at the healthcare reform, for example, which is fundamental for the country, and it's one of the biggest, achievements, or at least endeavors of the Poroshenko team. The controversy has come up something like 3 days ago, just because they started to talk about to present the team and to voice some ideas very, very late, and we see that I think it was yesterday that there was this appeal by 50 different NGOs to question the ideas of candidate Zelensky on the healthcare reform. Everything comes very, very late because there is such a large amount of uncertainty as to what he's going to do. When it comes to the capacities, when it comes to the capabilities, like this is going to be decided at the general election. We still don't know exactly who is going to run for him, in which conditions, and what kind of programs he would like his government to run. So this is one more question that we don't have an answer to.
Anna, you talked to the people? Like, did you get a bit more clarity?
I spoke with many people on both sides, experts, voters. I spent time with Zelensky's friends, with Poroshenko's electorate, and leaders of the right nationalist movements. Of course, I agree with you, Sebastian, that there are a lot of controversial issues. But for instance, one of the questions I asked, are you guys going to protest on the Maidan again if Zelensky wins? And even the most radical groups say that only if he steps away from the current course. Mm-hmm. So if he, for instance, decides to make coalition at the parliament with Medvedchuk's politicians, right, Medvedchuk's political party, then we are coming out on the square in September. But before September, we still have a few months, right? So during these few months, we'll probably hear some, if Zelensky wins, we don't know, we'll see tonight. But if he wins, we'll probably see some of and hear some of wrong words from him and wrong statements and a lot of criticism. But my feeling is that he is a quick learner. He actually said that I don't know many things. He said that at Olympic Stadium, and he said rebels instead of boyeviki, right? Fighters. So he's learning the vocabulary still. And he will be learning a lot about economy, about social issues. But it seems that, we're talking about political animals, you and I had that discussion, that there is a strong sense that he is already one. So as a political animal, being so active and 41 and full of energy and quite physically strong, as his close friend Koshevoy told me that he's extremely strong physically, that he's resistant to many problems. He might surprise us. We'll see.
Yeah, I didn't really talk about controversies. I talked about uncertainties. Like right. With Zelensky, everything is possible.
It looks like. What do you think the civil society would do? Because this is a peculiar campaign in which I would dare to say that the part of the Ukrainian civil society in Kiev, and I know it differs from outside of Kiev, more or less endorsed the President Poroshenko, whom they criticized a lot. partly because, like, these people. We know these people. We have something to criticize, but we know how to deal with them. Zelensky is total outsider. We don't know how to reach them. We don't know how to talk. We don't know whether he really understands who we are. And it looks like that he really doesn't really much know this kind of civil society in Kiev who are activist reformers, and managed to get a lot of supporters. What do you think would happen, and to what extent this kind of, let's say, intelligentsia in Kiev is ready to involve? Because there are different kind of choices. You can be from the beginning, like the one, go to this critical position, or try to find more or less build the relations from the scratch.
First, there is no one answer, because there is no uniformed position, and this is no longer available. And probably there is a big part of the active civil society who is very much afraid of this uncertainty. Some of them are very much frightened with the risks which are appearing, and it's even not easy to identify all these risks. So this is certainly will be a kind of frustration for a certain part of the society. At the same time, also the feeling of certain opportunity also appears. And now in the civil society we have huge debates on this. Unfortunately, the first what appears now is that after this campaign, the civil society appears to be less consolidated than ever before. So we will have this clashes in the social networks, we have certain distrust, we have lots of controversies, and even hostile relationships inside this the active class of educated and engaged people. And this is a problem, because there is no clear way out of this. There is no clear, and as far as the campaign is continuing, entering the parliamentary phase, there will be no resolution immediately. And so this is a risk. I think that the shape of the civil society will be different from what we used to deal with after it ends. And there will be huge, I would say, probably the conflicts will appear even in those circles which usually we used to see them as united. Now it's not any longer. And the question to me, to what extent these civil society leaders will be able to come back to normality. Because we say a lot about the risks of turbulence which may appear because of some changes in the political power. But in fact, many of these fears are just in the mind of people. And to what extent they will be able to deal with this, what's going on in their minds, not in the political cabinets, will be a response on the next ways of consolidation of this reformist community.
I would just remind, because we're now doing this live, is Oleksandr Sushko, who is the CEO of the Renaissance Foundation, and an Ukrainian expert, Sebastien Gobert, who is a French journalist, and Anna Nemtsova, correspondent of the Daily Beast. I would probably go on with that, because what I feel, you're traveling around the country a lot, and I know, like, while staying here, while during coming, do you see a bit that there is this moment that it showed that the population outside of, not just outside of Kiev, also in Kiev, really has a bit of the different agenda, and it's so much about the economy rather than the anti-corruption fight and all, like purist, this kind of fight of the creating the NABU and or other things. How would you also explain this?
Obviously, but it's part of a wider picture, because if we consider that what may motivate, people in rural areas would be like very, very practical questions of economics, or like the tariffs of gas, like rising and so on, then Tymoshenko would be president. Tymoshenko would win the election. So we see that it's also something different. It's also this desire that is shared by a vast majority of Ukrainians to change the elite, to renew the people in power, and to basically to finish what Maidan started 5 years ago, and what Poroshenko himself promised to accompany, and so on and so on. But we see that there are obviously some considerations that are different from this intelligentsia in Kiev, but there are some trends that are shared by most of the Ukrainians.
There was it's not an elephant in the room. When we're speaking about somebody who would like to, break the old system, an oligarchic system, obviously there is a question about the connection of Vladimir Zelensky to Igor Kolomoisky, who is an oligarch. Vladimir Zelensky, just to maybe clarify, because it's often said, his show business company is performing and is selling his content to the 1+1 channel, who gives really the favor to Vladimir Zelensky. There is no question to that. He has as much time as he can with his commercial product. Mm-hmm. So really, what are our thoughts about that? How it's also seen, because this oligarchy is also, Ukrainian oligarchy is also now very different from the oligarchy in the post-Soviet space. It's very pluralistic so far, and I know some of other oligarchs are also concerned and hopeful, what I also know.
You're right, Natasha. If we just try to write a nut graph about the main questions that people have and the main concerns, they come to question whether Zelensky is the Kremlin's project and whether Mr. Kolomoisky is trying to agree with the Kremlin. And I've heard on both sides different opinions about that. I even heard a story that Mr. Kolomoisky has already reached to the Kremlin's administration and invited them to negotiate, but they did not come because in the past, several years ago, Mr. Kolomoisky said something really rude about a Russian leader, and they don't know if that would be approved by the leader or not. They visit with Mr. Kolomoisky. So, but when I ask serious observers, like NDI or other international observers, I just spoke with Bill Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He doesn't think that Mr. Zelensky is the Kremlin's project. He hopes that is not true. So, and if they haven't found out that by now, maybe there is no evidence. But who knows, we might find out something absolutely shocking later. So there are still questions in the air and unanswered.
Oleksandr, about the oligarchy in Ukraine.
So, yes, this is still a risk. That there will be a new wave or new re-emerging oligarchy if and when it will be proved that there is a change of power which goes to the weaker presidency. For example, if the new president, if he's elected, becomes a weaker figure, there will be a chance for oligarchy, not for Kolomoisky himself. Because I really do not think that, for example, Zelensky, if elected as a president, will do exactly what Kolomoisky expects. No. But something is already happening which is worrying, and we will just see what already is happening in the courts. Courts in Ukraine is an institution which is built exactly to listen to the strong side. They are listening to who is coming with power. And court's decision of the last few days just proving that this quite corrupt system, which is under-reformed, is already making steps towards a person whom they perceive as a new master. And there is a big risk. Even it doesn't mean that Zelensky or whoever himself will make orders, but this system is looking for the new master. Mm-hmm. And they perceive that maybe Kolomoisky will be a new master. And this is a risk because this is a way how to discredit the entire I would say, an entire statehood, entire institutions which we have, and discredit also a new president if he's elected.
I would also clarify that we're speaking about the particularly one very important case about the nationalization of the Privatbank, one of the largest
There
banks
were
in
already
Ukraine.
3 court decisions related to that by 3 different courts,
And
which is a quite powerful signal.
At the same time, you saw like there were all kind of other theories about like what does it look to, why it's done right now. Yet that's something I probably think that all the Ukrainians, I mean journalists and all people who taking care about that are watching very, very closely. I would just today Mike Pompeo, the State Secretary of the United States, there was a message from him to both of the candidates, which is symbolic because previously we were looking how the West would accept the candidates, whether there is a balance between them, knowing kind of the difference in the polls. So what we can expect, what we can also expect, we know that there was this meeting with with Emmanuel Macron. That's the
other one, yeah.
the French president, and some things are getting kind of, he's becoming not that much who is Mr. Zelensky. Is it really that way? Would you also describe from your communication with the, with the foreign experts and with how do we see the foreign governments are looking at that?
Yes, although, anyway, the thing is that the candidate is not really important because Western authorities, diplomats and governments, they are interested to cooperate with Ukraine, and not so much as to who is going to sit in Bankova. So whether it was Poroshenko or Zelensky didn't really make any kind of difference. Plus, we know that the Westerners, very important, they secured a deal through the IMF for this kind of technical financial assistance program to continue until 2020, so it's not going to be dependent on the result of the elections. And what is also very, very important for the Westerners is that Ukraine repays $15 billion of loans that the Western authorities, the IMF, granted to Ukraine starting from 2014, and this is happening now. This is happening in 2019. So this is what is important for Western governments. And it seems to me that, a Zelensky president or a Poroshenko president would just have to ensure this kind of course, and then all the rest would be really fine with the Westerners. Also because the diplomats know that the competencies of the president are limited in Ukraine, and that anyway we all have to wait and to brace for general elections in October.
There's much interest on what I
Yeah, of course. I totally agree. Listening to what Pompeo said or any other American officials, United States will continue to support Ukraine and be here, present on the ground in terms of NGOs, experts, advisors. So that is one thing. Another thing is to analyze what is actually going to happen a week from now, a month from now, a few months from now. That is a very. I don't think that many of us have been had a chance to actually look forward. Right? We've been following the news, and the news were just storming every week. But Ukraine is at the doorway to reforms. The question is if the candidate who is about to lose going to sort of perform revenge later and try to stop the reforms, to occupy the niche of a political force that is trying and struggling to prevent the reforms from happening. That is the question. That would be not a positive sign.
Oleksandr, what are you asked? I guess you were reached out by many people to explain the Ukraine, but you're also asking them what will happen with the communication, because obviously the part of the also President Poroshenko campaign was that he is the best diplomat. He and in particularly in the Ukrainian society, this part of kind of the society gives a credit to Petro Poroshenko for his work with international partners. So there is clearly a difference in experience and connections.
First of all, the starting point is the legitimacy of the elected president, whoever elected. And now, as far as we see, the good chances that these elections will be perceived as free and fair, basically. So this is a ground for any relationships with the Western world. And then the next step is what is the program and what is let's say some benchmarks for the government. And here certainly there will be ambiguous relationships, because on one hand Poroshenko is quite familiar, but for many in the West, he is not comfortable because he demands a lot. He tries to pursue strongly Western powers to follow Ukrainian, I would say, point of view, especially when it comes to Russia, when it comes to the Ukrainians' ambitions to become a part of the Western institutions, such as EU and NATO. And other things which maybe are not on the table of the Western governments. Here there is, for some people in the West, there is a hope that Zelensky, if elected, will be less demanding than Poroshenko, more, I would say, trying to conform with the position of the biggest players, and then it will be easy to make deal with him, as he is not experienced. He has no intention to push strongly in a way like President Poroshenko did. And so I think that I'm sure that for some actors in the West, he will be likely even more comfortable. So, but at the same time, there will be a risk to lose the most devoted allies of Ukraine, as they are expecting from any government of Ukraine to follow current priorities, and there will be certain space for uncertainty as well.
One point we would probably can devote a full hour is definitely the issue of the war, where Zelensky obviously has a bit different point of view. He still is about fighting the war. I'm speaking like fighting the Kremlin and not being the Kremlin ally. However, he is really speaking about this unity between the population in the occupying territories. But that's something we this time can guess. But this is probably the point where this humanitarian side was for a while awaited by the Western partners to kind of be picked up, and these promises, for instance, to pay the pensions to the people who are living in the occupied territories. But I would ask you for the final to really say where we would. The polls would be, the exit polls would be announced at 8 p.m. We may know the results already tomorrow, official results, also almost morning Monday. There are 2 candidates, not 39, so it might be easier to count. So what would be your final words to our audience to say where to watch out, what would you follow?
Well, I've been thinking of Mustafa Nayyem lately, and that, he was on the news, got attacked in Odessa, and there was shooting in Odessa. So the civil society of Ukraine has been playing a very serious role in the last 5 years. And speaking with Nayyem a few times, I heard from him that Mr. Poroshenko did not stretch his hand and did not embrace the civil society enough. And that was a big problem. So today, Ukraine's civil society, NGOs, activists continue to suffer from pressure. And hopefully, whoever wins will change that.
I would expect some messages of unity and some clarification on the course to come.
Oleksandr.
I think that Ukrainians' mainstream line currently is not under threat. It may become under the threat if this election will be followed by too deep uncertainty, which will lead to the, I would say, reshaping of the political stage at the parliamentary election. And certainly, even if Zelensky wins, it doesn't mean the win of any alternative paradigm. But there will be a chance that if Ukraine, if the political, I would say, world of Ukraine will not manage with this new reality, there will be a chance just in a few months for revenge. And certainly the major challenge now, how to prevent this collapse of institutions, too deep frustration of the civil society and any active part of the people. So this is unusual, but the success remains dependent on how fast we may turn it into usual. So this unusual, but then it should go some way to institutionalize, to build. There is no other way than to build processes, institutions, and new reality which emerges. It is not a nightmare. So this is a challenge for the entire Ukrainian political system and the civil society and the society at large.
And what we really don't know, but what might be expected, of course, we keep guessing. There are just a couple of hours of before the end of the vote, that the landslide victory may anyway give a huge legitimacy, like a legitimacy which we hadn't seen for quite a while time, because that's also the interesting thing. It's not, at least according to the polls, it was not very close competition. It might be different. It might be different. Therefore, I say thank you. I would encourage our audience to follow Hromadske, to go to en.hromadske.ua. There is a en.hromadske.ua where you can see all the updates. We are there on Twitter and Facebook, Hromadske International, so you'll know all the results and updates. I'll work at the Mr. Zelensky headquarters. My colleague is working in Poroshenko headquarters. We are everywhere. There is a lot of reports from outside of Kiev. We have our reports in Lviv, Kharkiv, our reporters, correspondents in Lviv, Kharkiv, Odessa, close to the administrative border with Crimea, also in the front line. So there are a lot of stories at Hromadske, not just from here. We really try to talk about the people. So please support Hromadske. Go to we have the donate button in our webpage. So it's also could be good to support independent journalism in Ukraine. And stay tuned. That was Oleksandr Sushko, the CEO of Renaissance Foundation, the Ukrainian analyst and expert, Sebastien Gobert, a French journalist and co-founder of the journalistic collective Daleko Blisko, and Anna Nemtsova, American correspondent.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
The correspondent of the Daily Beast.
Good luck tonight.
Good luck tonight for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.